First, I want to to make some two short remarks. First, I come from France, which coming maybe from Australia or UK, you have to realize it's a rather socialist country. So I have an idea of what means, public-private way of managing an economy. And otherwise, I have to say I'm not against ESG in principle to start with, but I will be critical of some aspects, and this is why I want to disclose this in advance. Okay, so everybody speaks about sustainable companies. That's topics of the day. VU is really taking the floor on this. You have heard already this proposal of directive on CSDD, Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which includes an Article 25, for instance, which requires companies to be essentially be managed in the long-term interest of many stakeholders and so on. The article has not been voted, by the way, so it's not like it's done. It's refused by the Council, supported by the Parliament. My guess is it will not be adopted, but we have to see. Okay, France also always, at the forefront of, progress, so to say, adopted in 2019 an act which changes the definition of social interest to be more stakeholder-friendly interest. And all this is part of a sustainable capitalism debate, which we are dealing with here, which I think is the topic of the time today. I think there are two real questions here. When I look at it, really, you have the question of stakeholder versus shareholder capitalism. This is an old topic, actually, which is coming back. Should we have companies which are shareholder-centric or stakeholder-centric? This has been already discussed in the morning session a bit. And then there's another topic, which I think is really important, legitimate, is how to internalize external negative externalities of companies. And this is another topic. In a sense, it's two topics, I would say, are linked, obviously, but you can deal with them separately. So I think we have the old topic, shareholder versus stakeholders, and linked to this also how to internalize negative externalities. I will bring my humble position on this. Two short remarks before also. First, the concept of sustainability is linked to ESG, so environmental, social governance, but it's two different topics. And I want to say, when you speak about sustainability, everybody is in favor of sustainability. Nobody can be against this, but you have different flavors of this, and you can be ugly, I have to say, non-ESG and very sustainable, like the English East India Company, who was basically plundering India for 200 centuries, and they were sustainable. Let's be serious. They were very sustainable, but not ESG. So we have to be careful about what we understand between being sustainable, so long-term thinking, and you're doing, rubbish stuff. Okay, the other point is the debate about stakeholder, shareholder capitalism. This is all stuff. It's been going on all the time. It's just the cycle is turning again, and that's all, Rathenau in Germany, Bell and Dodd, and so on. Milton Friedman, took the lead since the 70s, and you had the fall of the Berlin Wall. So some people, I would say, carelessly thought the end of history had arrived, Henry Huntsman for company law. I never believe this, history never stops. And now it's a renewed debate, but it's back to the future. It's always been this debate, shareholder approach, stakeholder approach, with now Colin Mayer, Lynn Stott in the US was on this line, and we have Leo Strine, Jaap Winter, so a group of clever people, who is coming back and saying we have to look at stakeholder capitalism. We have people who say planetary boundaries, so companies should be run in the respect of planetary boundaries. This is about Safeld, but others also in Norway. So we are back to these old debates, which change in time, according to periods. Okay, so I will look at the problems we are facing with, let's say, classical liberal capitalism, the tools which have been proposed, the risk with I see if we push too much in one direction, and the solutions I will suggest or I will put to your reflection. Okay, there are two classic problems in company law which have been discussed endlessly. Short-termism, so people look at short-term profit at the expense of the rest. Whether, it's highly debated, I will not get into this. Some of the answers are to look at, for instance, double voting shares, multiple voting shares to promote long-term capitalism. So this already in the EU, for instance, which has been promoted. Then the other issue, which I always thought was troubling, is the lack of accountability of management for stupid decisions. but you had, or for abuses or non-ethical behavior, but it's hard to regulate this kind of stuff because you go to a judge and then the judge says, well, you know, I'm not here to run ethics board. So this is a real issue which has been, which is, I mean, troubling because you never get to the point on this. So how can you do this? What has been done historically is transparency, for instance, of remuneration. What was the effect? They increased in Europe. When they were hidden, they were low, and when people saw how much money people were doing, they went up. Now, another idea to solve the issue was to give the power from the board, transferred from the board to the shareholder meetings. So say on pay, basically. What was the result? Nothing. So it didn't change the compensation packages. Now, other ideas which have been aired is stewardship codes. So let's force the shareholders to put control, exercise their voting rights to force ethical behavior and so on. What's the result? I would say the jury is still out. It's a good idea in principle, but the result is still not clear, I would say. But this is left for debate, and there are people who are experts in the field. Dionisa is working on this. So it's not a bad idea. Will you really have result? We'll see. Now we have problems linked to globalization, supply chain abuses. So you make your iPhones, your phones in other jurisdiction where you have some type of maybe slave labor or child labor. I mean, ugly stuff. Nobody wants this, obviously, but bad working conditions. But this is what globalization was supposed to work. You will externalize plants in countries where you have legislation which is very below our average, like in the Western world. So it's an issue of law against ethics. It's legal. Is it ethical? Well, it's difficult to say because if you want to survive, you have to do like the others. Otherwise, you are not competitive enough. So the government says you have to play within the globalization, which means when you go to China, where you have no workers' right, they were paid 10% of the average salary as in US and Europe. So you disindustrialize Europe. So this is a big problem. Okay, and then you have a new problem such as climate change, because you see that I mean, we can feel it, that you have issues here. How to deal with this? Should the answer be organized by the state, but also by the private companies? We spoke about Climate Earth case this morning. We'll make a small point on this. So we have new issues and old stuff. You know. Okay, what are the tools proposed? At least I will focus on the EU, but you can expand this to your jurisdiction, of course. Well, you have two tools, you know. One, which is a kind of classic stuff, which is disclosure. Disclose what you're doing in terms of ESG. And this has been going on for centuries. And if you take the US, this is the Securities Act. That's the idea that, you know, you can be ugly, but you have to tell it. And of course, you don't want to be looked as ugly, so you will behave. And here, Europe has been moving very fast. And you have this European sustainability reporting standards, which are being discussed now, published, where you have to say how much water you consume, what's the risk to the environment of your activities, how much electricity do you know, all this kind of stuff. And obviously, I think this will have some impact. Of course, you don't want to be seen as, you know, abusing, you know, natural resources. So this will have some impact. But of course, if you ask companies, do you have to stop producing oil? If you ask oil company, then you know, they're not going to. They say in the US, Turkeys don't vote for Thanksgiving. You know, you cannot, you know, force them to do this. So it's a regulation by disclosure. I think this will have some impact, but it will not have the impact which is really expected. Then you have substantive regulation. So let's force companies. And here, this is the debate about corporate purpose. So companies will be asked to have a purpose, to be good citizens, and so on. You have this say on climate resolution, which are popping up a bit here and there. So shareholders, yes, thank you, will be given, you know, some kind of say on what will be going on. The problem is, when I look at this, is if you go to Total, the French company, or Eni, and you tell them, stop producing oil, I mean, what are they going to vote? So the result is predictable. 95% says no way. So they might say we want to be nice citizens, but they cannot stop the business. So this tool is, I think, you know, not working very well. ESG compensation, it's an idea also in the CSDD directive. You will tie compensation of management and directors to ESG objectives. Good idea in principle because they are very much, let's say, sensitive to ESG compensation issues. But in practice, well, it's devil is in the detail. It might not work so well, but it's an idea, you know. And there have been some research from Harvard, from Tobias Strugger in Frankfurt, which says that it doesn't work, which is a bit disheartening, I have to say, because you thought, I mean, if money cannot be as effective carrot, what's going to be the carrot? And then you have this stakeholder governance. Let's have stakeholder committees. Let's force companies to work in the general interest. We'll see. And then judges, if this doesn't work, you go to see judges. But judges, they are not here to take what is essentially political decisions about what activities are allowed or not. So I'm not surprised about the kind Earth decision. You know, you can, if you go to judges, they will say, "Well, I'm not expert in the field," and so on. Okay, so let's look now at the risk if you put too much into this direction, in my view, and the solutions I think which could be used here. Well, if you ask people to do, I mean, companies to work in the stakeholders' interest in the general sense, then you end up with directors having contradictory objectives. You know, okay, I understand that this is an old argument, but it's not so easy. You cannot run an oil company and at the same time say you want to reduce. This is a public policy stuff. Then also, if you push this idea too much that companies have to be in the benefit of the society at large, well, companies, a large one, will become de facto arm of the state. De facto arm of the states. And you have here risk in terms of effectiveness, competitiveness, crony capitalism, you know, connection to the governments, which lead you to not great results. You have this concept which came clearly from Jake Sullivan, which is the national advisor to Biden, of state capitalism. So the state will tell you which activities you have to work in, and in the context of competition with China, of course, companies will have to comply. So companies will be driven anyway by the state. And state capitalism, you had this experience in Italy, I have to say, you know the result also. So, I mean, it can be useful maybe, but at the end of the day, it's not so great. Okay, and then you have people who say, thanks, yeah. The degrowth agenda. I mean, I've seen a stunning event in Brussels. I mean, not seen it, but degrowth agenda. We need to degrow to save the planet. We need to, so they're not speaking about science. They're saying we need to consume less, to do whatever. Okay, understand the issues. But degrowth agenda, so everything is wrong. Growth is wrong, and we need to degrow. And if we, and there was an interesting panel which says how to degrow and keep a social welfare state. Yeah, good question, I have to say. We'll see. So the solutions. I mean, I think there are two. I mean, my humble view on this is to say you can work on. We cannot ask everything from companies. I mean, or for company law, it's just a tiny legal, you know, technical domain. I would say leave freedom to companies to choose. If they want to embrace the ESG agenda, fair enough. Fair enough. This is the freedom of choice. And I support the dual model, which by the way has been also very successful in Italy. You have companies who do their business, who try to make profit in a legal and ethical way within the framework. And you have foundations behind, which can also promote the public good behind. You have this in Germany, it's very effective. You have this in Nordic countries. You have this in Italy also, you know, Fondazione, all this stuff. And also think about solutions outside the world of company, you know. For instance, pricing negative externalities, or even prohibiting tax incentives and so on. So you have a lot of other tools. So my conclusion on this is maybe we're asking too much of companies. This is a public policy debate in many fields, and the government has to fix the limits, what is allowed, what is not allowed. But asking people, private corporation, to deal with stuff which is in sense beyond their control, of course, they should be pushed in this direction, but how are they going to succeed in this? So it's not easy, and I think we should look at the full picture and not just focus on the directors who are just human beings sitting in a room and be asked to deal with what is essentially sometimes political decisions. So this is my take. It's a bit provocative, sorry, but I think it's and again, I'm not against, of course, sustainability, and I'm in favor of fighting climate change. But the question is the tools. We need effective tools. And is company law the most effective tool? Well, I have my doubts, but I leave this for the debate. Thank you.